if you are someone who really struggles to continue to take action on something that you know you should be doing, like say for example, you read a book and you find out a framework or something that's really going to be helpful for you in terms of developing yourself in whatever way, and you read it and you say, this is class, this is really going to help me, it seems like the perfect thing for you, and you set out this great master plan. You say to yourself, okay, I'm going to do all of these different things, but as time goes on, as the weeks go on, maybe you're taking a few things, you're taking a few bits of action, but you're meeting these roadblocks and you're not quite sure how to overcome them, and then eventually it just leads to this period of complete inaction, and you find yourself even a few months down the line coming across that book on your shelf or on your Kindle, whatever it is, and then suddenly saying like, wow, what was that book about again? This is something that happens a lot of the time for people who are conscious of their need to develop themselves and who want to take action but actually struggle with that part in taking action. It's a really, really common issue that people have with wanting to develop themselves. So in this episode, this behind the scenes episode of building a movement community, I'm going to go through some things that I found very useful, some of my struggles along the way with this very same problem. And I will give you tons of resources, tons of things to play with, some of the reasons why you're struggling with this, and how you actually go about then taking action from this episode, practically taking action, going through the process and actually making the change that you want to see. So if that sounds like you, or it sounds like something that you'd be interested, then keep listening, keep watching, all that sort of stuff. Hello folks, you're very welcome back to another episode of the Meditations on Movement podcast, but this is the behind the scenes series. Bit of a mouthful, but you catch my drift. If you've been looking at the podcast recently, if you've seen some of the recent episodes, we're going with this slightly different approach with testing new things. I'm not completely stopping kind of like the more well-crafted, put-together pieces, but the aim is to just do kind of short, deeper dives into things and maybe just give you a little bit of a running order of what's going on in terms of the process of building out a movement community, what that looks like, and what it entails. So Bodhi is down. You may have noticed there's been a little bit of a gap between now and the last episode. We were at a wedding over the weekend, so it kind of required a lot of time of us. It was in Kerry, so we knew we had Bodhi, so we didn't want to be traveling kind of too far on the day itself. The logic being that we didn't want to be too far away from Bodhi, but either way we kind of were. We went down to family in Cork, so the idea was we stayed in Cork and then the wedding was in Kerry, so it was still a 2-hour drive. The morning of, like, we went down on the Thursday, wedding was the Friday, came back to Cork on the Saturday, then came back to Dublin on the Sunday, so driving. Didn't really make, kind of like in lieu, or thinking back on it, probably didn't make too much of a difference, that kind of way, but I guess it did give us the opportunity to kind of get up that a little bit later. Like, we had family, grandparents kind of close by to help us out with managing Bodhi, so made a difference. Maybe if we'd gone and ran the other way, it would have been a complete nightmare. You would have been just running around like a headless chicken, trying to get to Kerry for a certain time and then coming back the next day, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was very nice. Always very nice to kind of have something like that makes you like switch off. Like, it was one of Lucy's friends, so there wasn't a whole load of people that we knew there, so I guess there's less kind of like baggage going into it, if that makes sense. Like, you can make a whole fuss and a mess of wedding when you know a lot of people, right? You may be a little bit involved and there's a whole build up to it a little bit more, whereas this was kind of like a nice, like, you get a little bit of a reminder, like at the start of February, we're like, oh yeah, we've got a wedding to go to, that kind of way. So prepared in some way, but you're also like, you could easily forget about it and then be like, oh, nice surprise, you get to go to a wedding, that kind of way. So it was lovely. It was nice, met some really nice people, had some good chats, didn't go too crazy, stayed up till 12, but I think I was hesitant to go wild or crazy based off my experience with a previous wedding, or the most recent wedding that I'd gone to. It was Lucy's brother, so act the maggot, and was went way overboard with the alcohol consumption. So felt it the next day. Didn't want to be doing that again. Probably will never drink to that extent ever again. But you live and you learn. It's all about experience. You know what I mean? Other than that, like, yeah, I mean, the work takes a bit of a break in those kind of periods. You know what I mean? You're on the road. You're doing loads of bits. So only so much I could do. Even movement as well to a degree. Like, I mean, loads of dancing on the Friday. Didn't really move about too much on the Saturday, you know, that kind of way. Got back on the Sunday, moved a little bit, but nothing crazy. So I guess training takes a little bit of a knock. You know, I guess that's the one thing that I've been finding challenging over this period of time is I kind of alluded to it in one of the previous episodes with how I've been approaching my own practice over time and the ways in which I've kind of had to fight for time in some way. But I mean, a period like that, kind of like 2 or 3 days, isn't going to be the end of the world. And I think that's an important thing to communicate, is that, you know, when, you know, for a lot of people, I might be seen as someone who is very active, and I am, of course, but that kind of identity or label comes with a certain expectation, in that people think that, like, I'm moving and doing loads of stuff on a regular basis, and I may be in consideration to what you're currently doing, but it's in no way like unrealistic or undoable for the vast majority of people. It's just kind of a bit of a shift in perspective in terms of understanding what it does for you. You know, like, I know, for example, that something like the session that I'm going to do today, like, it's Monday 17th of February, so, you know, I moved loads on the Friday, not really much over the weekend. I know that the session today is, I'm going to feel great afterwards, you know, even if I might feel crap kind of going into it and still a little bit like lethargic. I'm not too bad, energy is good, I slept okay, all that sort of stuff. I just know that even the smallest amount of movement on a regular basis is going to give me a lot of benefits. So when you're just not in the habit of it, you can kind of psych yourself out in some way. So I guess that's the important thing to be aware of, is that maybe it's just a shift in priorities that you need to reconsider movement's place in your life, and the benefit that it can give you. But yeah, back into I guess a regular work routine. With this week, you know, last week it was very much about like the condensed work blocks, so it meant that kind of things were running at a very fast pace, which I was able to manage, I was able to accommodate, and I think that's one of the things that I was really the most happy and content with last week, was the fact that the busyness didn't you know, lose the run of itself. I was able to prioritize certain things, get a lot of things done for the week, even though I only had kind of like 3-ish days of normal schedule. It kind of leads me to now going like, oh, I need to, not that I wasn't operating at that pace, but maybe that I need to look at some of the blocks that I'm working at as maybe a little bit more kind of urgency laden. Like, I really need to push the mark in terms of like what I'm planning on getting done. Like, there's the Eisenhower matrix for I think I'm right in quoting the Eisenhower matrix with this, the idea that you know, work will expand to fill the time. So if you're setting yourself like 5 hours to complete a task, you know, it will expand to fill that time. You'll kind of plan about things and go about it in a different way, and it kind of leads us into the topic that I wanted to make the main discussion of today. But yeah, this idea that like if you kind of set aside 20-30 minutes, like, even though that might be necessary for that period of time, I guess you have to weigh up like, how much time do you want this to fill, how much time does it really need, and you're only going to get that through a process of kind of iteration over time, where you're kind of going through it and seeing it via experience, like, is this matching what I want out of the task at hand, what I'm trying to do. So for me, in terms of understanding the Eisenhower matrix, it's like, okay, that last week was a bit of an example of like, cool, I can actually, there are certain things where I can maybe just fast forward a little bit and make sure that I get it done in a more urgent manner, whereas maybe having the week leads me to expand things a little bit more and maybe ideate more than I need to. So sometimes putting those constraints, like I've talked about it in the past, as like maybe I've talked about it myself, not necessarily with this podcast or episodes of this. I know myself that like sometimes constraints like that really, they make me panic to a degree. You know, there's so much that needs to get done, and then the minute I set a deadline, it's like, oh fuck the deadline. It almost looms too much and puts a negative pressure on me. But I know I've I've played with the concept, and I've managed to make it something that kind of works for me in terms of I look at it more as like kind of like habit. That way, when I know I'm executing on something on a regular basis, I'm not going to lead to these kind of periods of burnout, crash and burn, and then not be consistent with anything and kind of in and out, in and out, in and out. But maybe that kind of like tactical level of urgency is probably needed a little bit more, and especially with the current project that I have in terms of everything that I'm working on in terms of you know, I've yet to announce it properly, and I will in due time. I just want to make sure that I kind of have certain things set in place in terms of defining it, getting it set up before I start kind of peeling back the curtain. And I guess it's the process that we're going to uncover here with this behind the scenes idea of building a community. It's more directed towards the online aspect of things, but it's really culminating and bringing together a lot of my work over the last little while into something that kind of acts as a bit of an entry point for a lot of people into movement. Because I know when it comes to movement, a lot of people are kind of they're a bit unsure of what it is and how it can benefit them and everything like that. So having something as a little bit of a entry point, a more intensive period, is a very nice way of going about things, because it kind of that the idea of it being intensive for me is going to be really good, because it'll be demanding in terms of time and energy, but that's really what stokes the fire of change. You know, that's really what gets things burning in terms of like, right, we're setting out for a defined period of time. These are the objectives that we're trying to hit, and breaking it down into things that are like very, very doable, very, very manageable, but just setting that as the expectation from the start, meaning that I know by the end of it, we're going to have a very tangible, a very practical result by the end of it, and a huge change. Like, I mean, I look at it as something like, what if I were in, like, because it can kind of be the issue that I have necessarily with communicating a lot of things at times to people that maybe have very little experience at movement, or maybe find themselves in those kind of struggle points where, you know, they're not sure of an entire system of training, or maybe they're starting to question the things that they're currently doing. They're not feeling very coordinated, or they're feeling very stiff in their body, and they're leading themselves kind of down this line of, I thought I was experienced with training. Like, that's really the people that I'm kind of highlighting here are they have a little bit of experience with training, but things just aren't gelling well. They need that kind of freshness brought back into things to kind of overcome some of the issues that they're currently having. Because even though they've got loads of experience with training, they're stiff, they're uncoordinated, they're not really moving as well as they know they should with the amount of experience they have. So with that in mind, I kind of have to, you know, I have to put myself in their kind of shoes and their frame of mind to understand what are the things that they're currently doing, to then what are the things that I can add and give them to have like the most amount of impact in not necessarily the shortest amount of time, but you get my meaning in terms of like, here's something that I want you to do that's very, very specific. You know, here's exactly what I want you to do. Here's the time frame that we're going to do it for. Here's the expected results and change, and here's the theory and background of everything, so that you can really grapple with a lot of these ideas and go through a huge process of change, like really attacking it from a lot of different angles. You know, I've talked about it before, this previous model of kind of like body, mind, and spirit. Like, can we really develop on all of those three layers? You know, you take away one and kind of it doesn't necessarily have as much of an impact, and certainly the practical elements of things are super important. Like when you add the practice on top of it, that's where you have the experience, you know, because you can sit with something, like you can sit and you can study, and I think people are starting to become maybe more aware of this, or maybe not. Maybe I'm just kind of living in a bit of an echo chamber here, but I think what people are getting stuck in is this idea of information and education, and it's so widely available for us now, isn't it? And we can sit and we can plan out all of these different things, and we can see a lot of the information in front of us, and it kind of makes sense. It's like, oh, I need to do X, Y, and Z, but then we never really go through the effort. We never go through the process. We never practically do anything, and it's the practice. It's the experiential learning. That's what really leads to the change of character, the change in development, the transformation that we're looking for. So I I guess with that in mind, I want to kind of touch on something very, very briefly here in terms of, say, like a theme or a topic for today's episode, because as I said, it's just kind of what are the things that I'm thinking about on a very regular basis. And while I want this to be a little bit more off the cuff, which it has been up to kind of now, I do want to make sure that I have kind of like one thing that I pull out of the ether that I'm kind of like, cool, I've sat with this for a little bit to kind of explain it and to have a little bit more of a flow. Whereas I'm sure on some days, I'll kind of look back on certain episodes, I'm sure, and I'll be like, oh, I was just a bit off. And I don't want that to necessarily to get in the way of these videos or how this is all going to be delivered, because it's a little bit more authentic. It's the idea of a behind the scenes kind of series where it's a little bit more like, certain days you're maybe going to feel like I've got low energy, or I'm really pushing something, or I'm grappling with an idea, or I haven't got something fully fleshed out, or maybe when I do kind of come to an end of something, there is this whole kind of messiness to things, and I'm going to try my best to kind of to stick to a somewhat of a habit of doing these videos, so that you can start to see that kind of that madness is the way I'm thinking of it, because it is really a process of it's having the goal in mind, and it's sticking to the plan, that kind of way, but also then giving space for ideas to come through, and for things to go at a faster pace, but then for things to slow down, like give something some breathing room, that kind of way. So I'm hoping that is something that kind of gets communicated here, because it's not a perfect linear thing. It seems silly when we think about it that way, but it's what we often see with these kind of when we don't see behind the scenes, and when we just see kind of surface level stuff, we maybe don't see the effort and sacrifice that has gone through, and the battles that someone has had, the obstacles that they've met. So I want that to potentially be communicated across with these behind the scenes videos. So the way in which I want to go, I am always paranoid that I'm not recording, so I'm very briefly going to check and make sure that we are recording, because we've been going for about 15 minutes. So okay, so we're still going. Maybe I'll edit that out, who knows. But anyway, what I was going to discuss today is this idea of the resistance to the work. So if you've ever really gone through a process of trying to take action, you've probably taking action towards anything. I obviously talk about it in the movement context of things, and the self-development context of things. That's really the areas that I kind of feel I'm most able to help people, of course. So this you're always going to have kind of this period of there's something in front of you that needs to be done, and we can get caught up. I think the issue that people have is they are, like I said earlier, they're seeking the information. They're going about things, and they're reading, they're studying, they're finding the things that they potentially need to do to help them solve the issues that they're going through. And that's very, very specific to this idea of self-development, in that we're maybe working on elements of ourselves, to a degree. It can show up and it can manifest in certain ways. Like sometimes we have to recognize that maybe we have a limiting belief about something, and that awareness, that level of awareness that we bring to a certain scenario, might just kind of crack it open as to, I'm looking at the external thing that's showing up, but I'm not necessarily addressing the internal state that I'm in that is, causing the external conflict, the external thing to arise, and for it to be maybe a repeating cycle or something that I struggle to overcome. So it's very, very specific, I suppose, in terms of the self-development side of things, but it becomes an issue because a lot of the time it stops us from taking action. This idea of how we end up resisting the work. So a way that I think about it, and as I said, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who struggles with this sort of stuff, because I've struggled myself. Like, this is not something that I'm necessarily that I've transcended in some way. I'm going through this in various ways, but I think about it as this idea of, like, if you're someone who always gets to those initial phases, and then progress starts to slow, you get distracted. It becomes it's something that becomes kind of like a distant memory, in the sense that you start to take action towards whatever it is that you want to take action towards, But then very, very slowly it starts to become something that you distance yourself from, or maybe you have a little bit of a break or whatever. But then suddenly it's just like a distant idea. You're like, the example that I think of is, think about, because of this is relevant to self-development, is think about the amount of books that you've read, the amount of systems that you've gone through, that you've read before, and you've been like, this is great, this is fantastic, I'm going to start applying things, I'm really going to do the work. Like, you even have these thoughts of like, this is going to fix all my problems, because it's so hyper specific to you and maybe some of the issues that you're going through. But maybe you're a bit slow to take some action, and you eventually get around to it and you start to take some action, and things are slow, you're maybe not seeing as much of a result, and you're kind of not even getting past kind of like a phase one of all the stages, if that's the way it's broken down, you know, that kind of way. But there just becomes a point where suddenly you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that was even a thing that I was trying to do. You know, we get distracted in so many ways. And I guess I point to this as kind of like one of those moments where you can start to recognize that, like, that resistance, it shows up in many different ways, but that resistance to the work really is part of the work. It's something that I've had to the way in which I've approached it is, I've been trying to take a step back from how I approach certain things, because, like I was kind of saying earlier, I can get very much caught up in the action that needs to be taken, and something just needing to be kind of like done, and like moving on to the next thing. And it's only when I take a step back that I maybe start to see the idea of patterns, of processes, of systems start to reveal themselves. Like, in terms of the conscious kind of system that I can put in place, like I can put together a framework, a methodology, a system in place in some aspect of my life, something that I'm doing. And obviously with my line of work, that's something that I end up having to do, because I go through various processes on a week-to-week basis. Like, I mean, I have a system for my students in terms of their one-to-one work that I do. We have a system that we apply like a weekly check-in. So we do a review of things on a week-to-week basis. So this is something that I have to kind of send out to my students as like, cool, this has to be done by a certain day, because I only have a certain amount of time within a certain block that I can do this. So it's very systemized in that way. I make it very, very clear what they're expected to send across to me. I have kind of like a checklist of questions that they would do. They send across a video, they maybe send across some updates in terms of their practice, what things that they've been doing, some ways in which they've been developing, or some things that they're maybe having an issue. And then I review things on a certain day, a certain block. I kind of chunk it all together so that I can get them information back. And then like that, it's a process that just on a week-to-week basis starts to take shape. The social media content that I've been doing is a bit of a process. I have to understand that aspect of things, and obviously there's a process of iteration in that I review things and I try to add certain things, and maybe I review and kind of see that maybe something isn't working, so I have to take a new direction. But you really have to grapple with a lot of things, and sometimes the basic execution of certain elements is just seen as this level of resistance. There's just some action needs to be taken. Like it's like I was saying earlier with this idea of like mapping out things. If you've ever heard of that idea of like planning and preparing is somewhat easy. It's the taking action that is the hard thing. Like we can sit here and we can plan and we can prepare on like various different things. Like I could have sat around and planned out and prepared tons and tons of things about like how I'm going to do the behind the scenes stuff, but there's a certain point where you just kind of have to go and do it, you know, that kind of way. You have to learn through the experience of what you're going through. And I'll review things, I'll do it, and then I'll get a certain bit of a reflection afterwards, a revelation, because I've gone through the process, and I'll be like, oh wow, I really like this aspect of things. Or maybe something just reveals itself where I'm like, that's terrible, like that's crap, like that needs to be redone, or maybe I need to go about it this way so that doesn't happen again. So you're only going to get that through the work, you know. And it's something that I point to, this idea of the resistance of the work is part of the work, because it's such a huge barrier, you know, for a lot of people. There's a level of distraction that starts to take hold. There's limiting beliefs that have to be overcome. There's just as bad as this sounds, you know, I don't want to necessarily sound harsh by saying this, but a lot of the times it shows up as complaining. You know, it's complaining about the issues and complaining about something being the way that it is. And I'm kind of like, it's easier for me to extract myself from the situation sometimes because I'm not going through it. But that's the idea of a guide and a teacher. It's to point at things that you're maybe not seeing because you're too involved in it. You're too emotive about it maybe. And this is a cycle. It's an uncovering. It's an awareness that you have to build. Is sometimes you're not just taking the action. And as cold as that sounds, the action is what's going to bring things forward. And if we can, if someone can point to that and make us aware of it, suddenly we go, oh yeah, like I'm putting so much energy into how I'm complaining about it, and it's kind of like a woe is me attitude to it. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, and I know it's not the most, it doesn't seem like the most empathetic lens to take, but if you really want the thing that you're trying to work towards, that's the shift that has to be made. You have to just look at it as, what's the obstacle in front of you, what needs to be resolved, what needs to be overcome in order for me to take the action that's actually going to bring me forward. So one of the things, like this idea of the system of things, it's really what led me to develop one aspect of the things that I'd released. One part of the process has been this idea of goal setting. And I created this thing called the meaningful goal setting system. It's something that I kind of, I've always had kind of like loosely there with my students, but I wanted to make sure that it was something more concrete. So I wanted to condense that, put it together, and I'm kind of slowly building the layers of what is this bigger project that I have down the line. So this is going to be one kind of element of it. So this idea of the meaningful goal setting system is a little bit more like a process for actually identifying things that are meaningful to you, so that when you come to these periods of resistance to the work, you've more tools at your disposal, more ways in which you can approach things, a better sense of awareness, a higher sense of awareness that you can bring to the situation to overcome those obstacles. Because I know for a lot of people it's a huge issue. They're distracted, they're finding excuses, they have very strong limiting beliefs around why they can't achieve what they want to achieve. So I'm hoping that through this course, of course, I'm providing those resources, those relevant things, those practical things that are necessary to overcome that issue. And the big thing is, it's a system, it's a process. Like I do with my students, it's a process of going through the action and refining. That is a huge part of it that I think, you look at a lot of things, and yes, they point to it that it's a system and a framework and all that sort of stuff, but there's never really that kind of that focus on, this is it. Like, regardless of how much you can kind of take from what is the educational bits of content around it, like they might explain how the system works and all that sort of stuff, but that's obviously necessary. It's relevant to really comprehend and to fully understand what's going on. But until you take the action, until you see it and you overcome each bit and you go through that process and you realize where you're stuck, like, that's what the process really reveals. It reveals where you are stuck. What are the things that you need to overcome internally for the system to operate and work? Of course, sometimes the system needs to be refined based on you and how you go about things, and maybe it might not suit perfectly, but the principles can be extracted from it to understand, like, oh yes, this is just a system, week by week, month by month, that can aid you in terms of what is the overall goal, the direction that you're going with things. And one of the things that will maybe help give you a little bit more of a practical take home from this video is to think about it in terms of bringing a level of patience to things. Because, as I said, I'm trying to give myself space from certain things, not necessarily not doing the work. It's understanding that when that resistance is there, it's like, right, I can see myself going through the kind of loop of, I'm about to distract myself, or I'm about to just step away from the work, or I'm about to just complain and give out, and I can see all of those things kind of starting to happen. But being able to bring a level of patience and relaxation to it allows me this ability to kind of, I feel like the silence allows me to see, like, to let something come out, is a way to think of it. I'm almost like, rather than becoming reactive and just reacting in a pattern that I've done before, it's giving me the space to go, oh wait, like, what is happening right now? And it's just almost like it's a breathing moment. It's like a zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. It gives me that ability to just see the bigger picture, the bigger context with which all of this is operating in, and then offers me an option to then go, cool, this obstacle, what is it that needs to happen for it to not become a consistent obstacle over time. It's really kind of looking at it through that lens of this is a system, this is a process. And yeah, like the patience and relaxation, like for me, it's the thing that I can kind of point to really that has given me that ability is like different practices that I've gone through, like meditation, that have helped me really see that reactivity, where I'm not just kind of like going through a thought pattern, or like, I mean, I know a lot of us would really feel that in our day-to-day actions, that we feel like we're just kind of going through the motions with things, and that really is like our habitual nature taking hold of us a lot of the time. So rather than meeting the obstacle like we do all the time and then distracting ourselves, avoiding it, and completely abandoning the process based on like one kind of obstacle, and complaining and having limiting beliefs around it, excuse me, this has offered me a chance to go, hold on, like I'm really resistant to something here. Like I can feel it. Like that resistance kind of shows up as tension. So it's giving me a chance to say, relax, like sit with it, breathe. Like as simple as all that sounds, and I know it seems very like, oh yeah, all you have to do is breathe, but it's what that allows, what that gives me, what that allows me to do, and to just sit with something, and to not be so like, this has to be done now, and it has to, like, that's oftentimes a lot of it. We want the result now, like we want to overcome this obstacle now. But I feel like that ability to pause, to be patient, to relax for a moment helps spark the idea, whatever it is that we're going to use as a way of resolving the thing that we're currently meeting. I just don't feel like we can do that when we become reactive, because the reactivity leads to that kind of emotive state, the frustration, the anger that we have with the thing in front of us, that ultimately leads to us not taking action. Like that's the frustrating part, is when you realize that it's not the frustrating part, it's the incredible part of the process, in the sense that it's that reactivity feels like we're doing something, I'm going to move on to something else, or I'll come to it later, blah blah blah. And you go about and you do something, and yes, you're taking action, but you're maybe not taking action towards the thing that you should be taking action towards. So even though you're kind of relaxing, taking a second, it's how you need to approach the thing. It's like you're meeting a wall. It's like, rather than just kind of like constantly bashing into it, trying to go through it, it's like, take a step back, reevaluate, look at your options. How do I get around this wall? What are the tactics that I can go through? What are the things that I can use to resolve it? And it's then kind of realizing that, like, okay, cool, like you're not suddenly going in and then finding more information, we're not going to go whatever. It's why am I having such resistance to this? Potentially, even though like the next step is somewhat simple. Like sometimes it might just be you're resisting it out of a pure limiting belief. You're not actually like, you have all the capabilities, you have all the knowledge that you could have to take the next step. It's just you feel like, oh, I need to do this a little bit better, I need to go find some more information about that, and blah 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 blah. When it's like, go through the process, make a shit version, like do the job, do it poorly, and then go through it again. Like like the process of iteration is that ability to refine, to review, to go through it. But you're not going to learn those things unless you continue with the action, with the process that you're supposed to be going through. Okay, so I feel like we covered a lot in that episode. So I'm very glad that we kind of had a little bit kind of set aside as to how we were going to approach things, because I feel like there was maybe a little bit more of a flow to that episode. You can let me know certainly in the comment section. You can like this, whether it's on Spotify, Apple podcasting platforms, or whether it's on YouTube. But yeah, really appreciate your time, folks. Hopefully that one was an interesting one for you to hear. I will be back hopefully tomorrow. Like as I said, Tuesday is my check-in day with my students, so I just want to leave myself open, that kind of way. I don't want to commit to saying that I will get a video out tomorrow, when sometimes it can be a little bit time consuming to add this in on top of it. But when the time is right, and when I have the availability, when I'm fresh and present and ready to go, I will sit down and record these. Okay? Appreciate your time. See you soon.